Welcome to In the Black, where we celebrate stories of transformation, resilience, and rising into the life you were meant to live. I'm your host, Aracelli, and this space was created to amplify voices often overlooked. Women who've come through the fire with wisdom, strength, and heart. Whether you're here for healing, clarity, or just good conversation, you belong here. Let's get into it. Today's guest spends her days sitting across from people in some of the most painful, overwhelming moments of their lives. Manisha P. Patel is a North Carolina family law attorney who has seen what happens when marriages break down, emotions run high, and families feel like they're falling apart. But instead of fueling conflict, she's built her career around helping people move through separation with dignity, wisdom, and as little destruction as possible. Through mediation, collaboration, and advocacy for children and families, Manisha helps people who feel deeply in the red find a path toward a healthier in the black outcome. Her upcoming book, End Your Marriage Peacefully, was born from witnessing what works and what causes unnecessary harm when relationships end. Manisha, welcome in
Hi,
to the podcast. Yeah.
thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Same here. So, would you do us a favor and just introduce who Manisha
Yeah,
is?
yeah. Again, my name is Manisha Patel. I'm a family law attorney in Greensboro, North Carolina. I'm a Virginia native, so I didn't travel too far from my hometown. But I have been practicing family law in North Carolina as a student attorney, as a licensed attorney for about 15 years now, and probably about 7.5 years ago. I opened my solo practice, my own law firm, and I began shifting the way I practice family law. I had seen so much through the traditional litigation world, and I wanted to change how I was helping people. That's why I became a lawyer. A little bit of my background. I'm the youngest of three, first generation. Both my parents emigrated from India in the mid to late 70s. And I am the outlier of the family. Everyone else is in the medical field. So I chose the law. And it's been a very rewarding journey. I just turned 40, so a lot of big things coming up in life. But I've found I've been in the let's say happiest place in my practice as I shifted from a very um, dog eat dog, fighting it out to the end, shifting from that mindset to focusing on the relationships and the people and practicing and helping these people going through a very difficult time in their lives that they probably never imagined they would be doing.
I bet that's very much needed in this world, especially with how everything has been developing over the years,
Yeah.
pharmaceutical ways and law and everything. So
Hmm.
it's good to, have people like you who want to come back to being more empathetic or one-on-one with the people. So how does your family feel about your being different and choosing a different path than the rest of your siblings?
Yeah, it was a really interesting journey. I knew from a very young age I wanted to be a lawyer, and I say very young. I think 14 is pretty young. It all started with a research project we had to do in eighth grade, kind of as your rite of passage before high school. It was on the constitutionality of the death penalty, whether it violated the Ninth Amendment of the prohibition of against cruel and unusual punishment. And so, as a 14-year-old, I had to do a research paper. I had to give a position speech. There was someone who was on the other side, if you will. And then we had a panel where we had to answer questions from community members. And so, through that whole experience, I think one, it confirmed this is what I want to do. I want to help people. I don't know how, but through the law. And I think through that process, my parents, my older siblings, they saw that I I had a different journey. And I think through that process, through undergrad, I had 4 wonderful years at Virginia Tech. And then they knew at that point law school was the plan. I applied to schools in North Carolina. They were supportive, and it's taken a minute to break out of the traditional cultural expectations. But I feel like this season in my life, my family has really just embraced what I have to offer and how I can help people.
No, that's so fun. I mean, having a lawyer and doctors in your family is not a bad gig, so.
Absolutely, absolutely. My older sibling, my sister, is a pharmacist, so we've got a pharmacist, we've got a surgeon, we've got a psychiatrist, and a lawyer. And my
Wow.
mom was a teacher, so we've got a lot of the bases covered.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That's just unheard of in my family. Let's just say was the first to go to college. Okay, so let's dive into the questions. So,
Yeah.
in your work, you
Mhm.
meet people at some of the lowest points of their lives. What does in the red look like emotionally and relationally when someone first walks into your office?
So I love your concept of in the red, in the black, because you're correct. When the majority of the time when people do come to me, they are in the red emotionally and sometimes financially, but they're really, I would say, lost and uncentered. And part of my job, yes, I'm an attorney at law. My bar license for North Carolina says attorney and counselor at law, and I don't take that lightly. And so part of that initial walking into the office or our first, virtual meeting, it really is the time for me to gauge how in the red are they, for example. To what degree do they need that emotional support in addition to the legal support? And really in our that very first meeting we talk about this, I hate to call it just a story because it's their life, but their life story, right? Their path, their journey to what brought them to my office, because I can get the facts. I can get your date of marriage, I can get the name of your kids, their birth dates, their ages, school enrollment. I can get that through a form, a questionnaire, but I like to spend that first meeting hearing from them with their own words what was the journey that brought them to this point. And that's how I gauge how far in the red they are emotionally. What kind of additional support beyond the law can I offer, and what other resources can I provide for what I cannot offer? And so I really love to just hear from a potential client, a client, even if it's a return client, which in family law happens quite a bit, especially when you have children. Children age, your family circumstances change, your households change. And so, especially with repeat clients, I really want to know what happened since the last time we saw each other. Um, and that's really when I gauge what level of support they need out in addition to the law, and how much support or, you know, hand holding, right? The counseling, do they need through the legal part on top of the emotional support? And so it varies so much from client to client. And I would, long story short, the answer to your question, it depends, the regular lawyer answer. But I think it takes some time, because the way I approach my practice is these are not just names on a client list. They're not just a number, a file number in my practice, my firm. I want to know these people. Often I ask for pictures of their children, so I know who are we talking about, or a family picture, whatever it may be. And that often leads to them opening up and sharing a little more. So I find that first meeting, Of course, I advise them of the law and how it applies to their situation, but before I even get to that, I ask them to share their story because that will help me understand where I need to start.
Yeah, beautiful. Well response. Good response. So, was there a moment early in your career when you realized divorce didn't have to be as destructive as you were seeing it play out?
Yeah, I would say, and I actually talk a little bit about this scenario in my book, but I was a part of a very high conflict custody case. It involved both sets of parents, both sets of grandparents. Um, Allegations of abuse, those types of situations, mental health concerns with different parties of those four different groups I mentioned. And so through that process, through that case, I mean, it went for years. It really went on for years. And I think in that sense, I felt like the court process was appropriate, but I also realized this is not the only way, and it doesn't have to be this way. And like through that case, working with those clients, and then I really just wanted to expand one, my skill set, my knowledge, my experience of how can I do this better? Oftentimes, people ask, you come from an economics background of, a very methodical, statistical, logical background. How do you handle the emotional part of what you do? And that was probably the biggest point in my career where I realized this emotions, these heavy feelings, even I'm having as an attorney, one, I can't be that person to absorb all of that. It's my job to help people process that in addition to that legal support. And I think going through that very high conflict custody case, I realized there are better ways that I can support my clients, whether it's through the law, through an alternative process, whether it's through simple communication skills, changing the way I communicate. And so I found that that was pretty really I don't want to say a tipping, the turning point of when I had that realization, and I knew there was something I had to change about the way I was practicing law to stay true to myself. I want to help people how I can help them the best, right? And so it's not going to be let's pad a bill, let's bill as many hours. It's the goal is let's help this family.
Again, very much needed. I'm glad that you're
Yeah.
more about the people and less about the hours and the billing, so that's really awesome. What personal experiences or observations sparked the idea for End Your Marriage Peacefully?
Yeah. So the personal side was I reached a point in my practice. Well, first off, I turned 40 on January 1st of this year. And last year, around this time last year, I had started thinking about writing a book. And I wanted to share my journey, right? One of my colleagues and best friends calls it my what is it? My villain origin story. And I when she first told me that, I was like, I'm not a villain. No. And she explained what she meant by that, my origin story. And so that's where this whole idea came from. And I thought at this point, one, it's a personal milestone in my life, but two, I've been practicing with this mindset, um, this, this way with these alternative processes and options for people for about 6.5, 7 years at that point. And I realized I need to share this. And then I looked into different ways I can share, the things that are up here, right? 15 years of practice and knowledge and experience and the different people I've, encountered and worked with and worked for, and sometimes worked against. And I thought, how can I get all of this out of here and get it to people. And I realized there weren't a lot of resources about collaborative family law, especially North Carolina, for people. Yes, it's meant for non-lawyers. It has some technical language, but I really wanted to approach this book with with the mindset of giving people the tools, giving people things that I've learned, I've experienced, I've seen, whether it's through the court process, through these alternative dispute resolution methods. And I wanted to help people understand this so that if they're going through times of separation, family legal issues, they had a starting point. And so all of it's really, interesting. This is literally around a year when all of this, um, all the thoughts in my head, started coming out into actual actions. Me taking steps to make it work. So that was how this book really came about because truly at the end of the day, I wanted to provide a resource about collaborative family law in North Carolina for people to understand that the court is not the only option. It is an option, but it's not the only way.
That's so cool. I mean, usually it takes people a long time to write a book, and sounds like yours took no time at all.
I mean, it did take a lot of work, but that's one of the joys of being your own boss. I could shift my schedule how I wanted, and the past year has been a lot of hard work, whether it's been through working with my clients and on their matters or writing this book. It took a lot more than I thought I ever had, and so I'm really proud of what I've created and how it can help people really, because honestly, I knew at 14 I wanted to be a lawyer. What kind of lawyer, I didn't know, but at that point, I knew I wanted to help people. I didn't want to sit at a desk all day. I didn't want to, sit on my computer as a lawyer. I wanted to have contact with the person, and so this is really, I feel like, the culmination of all of those things that built up to this point.
Oh, I love that. Why do you think so many people enter divorce in a defensive or combative posture instead of a constructive one? Constructive.
Okay, that's really interesting because I find that when people are focused, so consumed in their emotions, when they're in the emotional red, right? If when they're so deeply into that moment, it's so hard to think of anything else. And with emotions, when someone questions them, your first response is to become defensive because yes, my emotions, my feelings are valid, and this person is questioning them or trying to tell me they're invalid or challenging me. And so, from that initial interaction or whatever has happened before people separate, I feel like that is where people get that defensive and then aggressive because they want to defend their emotions and their feelings. And granted, that's not what I see all the time with every single person that walks through my office or every single client, but it's pretty common. And I think that, again, that first meeting is so pivotal with a client, a potential client, for them to know that they don't have to always be on the offensive. They don't have to be aggressive. And I think I do a great job through, again, doing this over and over for so many years that I can really help people not put that defensive wall up, which will cause or bring on an aggressive stance or a combative stance. And I think once we kind of break down that wall, that emotional red, we can slowly work towards moving into the black, the emotional black. And along the way, let's protect your legal rights and responsibilities. And through collaborative family law, we actually shift the way we communicate and negotiate, and we shift from the positional mindset to an interest based mindset. And so rather than saying, I want $500 a month in child support, we shift that to, I would like, you make requests. I would like $500 for child support because of some unmet need, because I need to move into an apartment and I have these additional expenses for this 12-year-old kid we have that's growing like a weed and eating me out of a house. So there's an unmet need this person has, and breaking it down in that sense versus I need this or I want this, I think that just really helps people shift and get closer to the emotional black, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, and before we started recording, I had invited your dog on your live. Is he
Yeah,
still on, or
he
is
is.
he?
He has okay. So when I'm in North Carolina, so where you have the big snow ice storms. So when I work from home, my home setup, he has a little sofa next to me, and so
Oh,
he actually, I think he has lulled himself to sleep. So he's
wow.
on his little sofa just snoring away.
How cute. I love that. My dogs are still sleeping.
Yeah.
Okay. So, can you share how mediation or collaboration has changed the trajectory for families who thought things would end in disaster?
Yes, absolutely. And so I'll give you an example because, again, I find examples, real life situation scenarios, great ways for people to understand how that does change that trajectory. And so, like I mentioned, I come from an economics business background, and when people learn about these different processes like collaborative family law, about mediation, about just negotiation, whether we're in the litigation phase, meaning in court or not. I find that the more people learn about it and the benefits versus the benefits of litigation and the downfalls of all the options, which again in North Carolina we're ethically required to advise people about all these options. I do talk about mediation and collaborative family law, quite a bit because I have seen how it does help, whether we resolve a matter within 4 to 6 months versus 9 to 12 months. I've seen that happen. I once had a situation where um, it was a collaborative family law case. And just a little background about collaborative family law: you sign an agreement, the two collaboratively trained attorneys and the two parties, whether they're spouses that are separating or co-parents, we sign an agreement saying you're not going to litigate, you're not going to file a lawsuit, you're going to give full disclosure, no holding anything back in your back pocket to sling out at the opportune moment. And three, your collaborative attorney will not be allowed to be your attorney if you enter into the court process, the litigation process. And so, with that buy in, people really see that there is a mutual buy in, right? Not just one person. And through that, this one couple that came to me and a colleague who was the other spouse's attorney, they had they were married, they had separated before, they had a separation agreement, they reconciled, and many years down the road their relationship got to the point where they had to separate again. And through that process, from when we had our first collaborative session to signing documents, it was maybe 6 to 8 weeks. I think we had everything resolved in about 6 weeks. To get all the documents signed and notarized, it took a couple more weeks, naturally. And I saw how those both spouses had that mutual buy-in and knew that no one's going, because we entered into this collaborative agreement, there's no hiding information, whether it's financials, a new partner, whatever it may be. There's no hiding it. You've agreed, you've signed a legally binding contract saying you're not going to hide anything. And I think through that, when people really understand that, they see how it benefits their situation. And quite honestly, this family, and I use the term family because they are a family. They shared three kids, and those three children were the forefront of the that couple's decision making process. That was the first thing we talked about in our collaborative sessions. It was the first thing, custody arrangements, school choices. It was Those were the first things we resolved. And once those two parents were able to get on the same page with that, everything else fell into place pretty seamlessly. Honestly, what took the longest was me, the other collaborative attorney, and I drafting the settlement documents. Honestly, I feel like that was the bulk of it, and just making sure we had the correct language and business information and things like that. And so I've seen that happen in real life, in practice, how that mindset will shift.
Hmm. You work with children involved in family conflict and social
Mhm.
services, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
How does seeing things from a child's perspective shape how you guide parents?
Yeah. So through that work, I'm a trained guardian ad litem in North Carolina. It started when I opened my solo practice at the end of 2018, and I left a secure job, a guaranteed salary, benefits to open up my own shop. And I knew from the outset I needed to find a way because, again, new business, small business, I needed to, pay my bills, right? And so I knew I wanted to find a way, an outlet to help people. How can I help my community? And that started with becoming a volunteer guardian ad litem for the county, for my local county's guardian ad litem program. They assign, or the judge will appoint you to what you commonly hear DSS, social services, or CPS when a child is taken into county custody, DSS custody for whatever safety reason, and they get a representative, a guardian ad litem to speak for them, to represent them in court, to give them a voice. And I felt that that was such a needed resource for our community here locally in Guilford County in Greensboro, North Carolina. And so I came upon that through a newspaper. I read it online, the digital newspaper article about the number of children in county custody, and the actual need for representatives for children. And so through that process, I think that has also helped me be a better lawyer, a better collaborative attorney, because I'm seeing that from a child's perspective in those cases. And when we're working with parents or separated spouses through the collaborative process, or even in a mediation, um, I I can talk to them about perspectives from their children, whether I've met them or not. It gives me the different thoughts and ideas and ways and things we need to consider for their children, that maybe they're so emotionally in the red that they just can't see past it, and they need a trigger or something to bring them back to, okay, we're talking about custody, let's talk about what are their needs, what are their desires. And if they can't voice that for themselves or don't feel comfortable, and that's huge, if children don't want to pick sides, which I wholeheartedly believe they shouldn't have to, or be a go between, but for their parents, we can involve child welfare specialists who speak to the children. Again, other guardians at Lightem, kind of like the work that I do through the county. And then outside of the collaborative process, I do court appointed, I call it private guardian at Lightem work. So I I just had a case that, because of the snow, it's going to be pushed, with court closures today and everything being pushed to tomorrow. And I had, probably my report was over 300 pages, close to, I think, it was close to 400 pages, with all the medical and school reports and providers and mental health professionals. And it's a lot of the investigation part of my guardian ad litem work that I really get to be on the inside of the mind of the child, right? Thinking, how are they seeing this? What do they want? What do they need that they don't have? And how can I communicate that to a judge so the judge can find a way to have those needs met? And so I feel like through that work, that through that training, it's made me a better lawyer, and it's made me, help my clients in a better way because I have that perspective of doing that kind of work with children.
Yeah, I think it just separates you very well from other attorneys. Like I said before, it's just very much needed, and I think not very common,
Mhm.
especially to kind of advocate for kids or take the kids into consideration because they are the ones who are impacted, I would probably say, the most
Mhm.
of the divorce process. They would get traumatized from this,
Oh yeah.
more so than others. But
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was just going to say with that, you know, it's also as a guardian ad litem, the way we talk about the emotional red and trying to get into the black, that goes with children too. And especially as a guardian ad litem, I make recommendations to the court, to a judge, to say, this is what the child's wishes are, but this is what I believe is in their best interest, which is our legal standard for custodial arrangements and child custody. And I get to make recommendations. They need this physical health attention. They need this mental health attention. They need this emotional health attention. They need educational attention in this particular area. And I think with that, I I've learned that it's not just the parents. I have an economics degree. I have a very business minded perspective, but this really helped me dig into the emotional aspect, and not just for my clients, it's for the family, whether this is a 7-year-old child, 14-year-old child, or 17-year-old child. Part of that is advising clients that, okay, you have a 16 and a 17-year-old. If you go to court, everything is public record. And now North Carolina is 100% on our e-court system, which means before, to look at a court file, you'd have to physically go to a courthouse and request to look at it, pay for copies. Now you just have to have an internet connection, look up a person's name, and you can look up every court action that's been filed in the state, regardless of what county you live in. We have 100 counties. I'm sitting where I live, and I can look up every other 99 counties to see a court file. And so those teenagers they will know. They can go online, and I've had clients' children do this, and they can see all the things either one parent has said about the other, or how one parent is defending those things. What did they say in response? And that trauma for those teenagers is going to be lasting. And in probably 8 months ago, we had a case where a client's children, one parent shared the court documents with the teenage child. And it was not so much having to um, kind of put the band-aid on, but helping my client see, okay, this is where we need to help the emotional trauma for your children, for this child especially, who has seen all these documents. And how can we do that? And we found a mental health provider that works with children, that works with these family transitional periods. That's how I like to describe them. And it really help the child probably for about 4 months into the process, after the parents physically separated in two separate households. It really helped that transition. And it's one of those things, I'm just thinking about it and I have goosebumps thinking, if I were just in that litigation mindset, if I didn't have this other experience as a guardian ad litem, would that have been something so immediate that I would have recommended or advised my client to say, let's find someone to help your child who has seen these things, which again, a lot of times it's just lawyers posturing in court documents. And so I've seen that firsthand. And so a lot of that, emotional pain and trauma is not just, my clients, the parents, the spouses, it's the children.
Yeah. What are some choices people make while they're in the red that unknowingly make the situation worse emotionally or legally?
Okay. So let me start with the legally part because that's pretty rampant, especially when they don't come to me or another attorney or even just have a meeting with an attorney from the outset. The aggressive ways of communicating, that is one of the hardest things I find to that hold people back, if that makes sense, that keep them in the red emotionally and legally. Because let's say, I'm just going to say, let's say we have a custody matter and they're sharing text messages back and forth that are very aggressive, very inappropriate, and not even about the child. And so, one of the ways that I help people kind of take that out, or it makes it difficult, is one, if this goes to court, then a judge is going to be reading these text messages, or an attorney, or a party, and it's going to be out loud in open court on public record. And so that's one of those things where I would often say that that's going to hurt us, that will hurt us. And I see it all the time, all the time. And so one thing, what how I kind of alleviate that, or what's the word, I help minimize that type of communication as we move forward. And I do this even in my personal life. Through the collaborative law process, I learned about nonviolent communication. It's a thought process, a method of communication, created by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg. And not only as it's a tool in my collaborative toolbox, my attorney toolbox, if you will, but it's just honestly a reframing of the way you communicate. And it takes out the heavy emotions, or it like brings them down so they're not so heavy. And you focus on your actual needs that are met and unmet. You focus on first observing what are those feelings, what are those emotions, and then identifying those feelings and emotions, then figuring out what are the met needs or unmet needs. More often than not, when people come to me, they're unmet needs. And how can I or my client make a request to find a way to have those needs met? And when I learned about this, I started practicing in my personal life, whether it comes with a romantic relationship, a friendship, most prominently my family relationship. As I mentioned, my parents emigrated from India in the 70s, and my siblings and I are the only ones in our family, at least until my generation, born and raised in the United States. All my other cousins and older generations are from India and then came to the US. And so I find that I growing up, I had a lot of conflict from naturally the East West culture clash. My family's very traditional, culturally, religiously, and as any person born and raised in the United States, again, we're a melting pot, right? That's how this country was founded. And I'm exploring, I'm learning about different religions, I'm learning about different cultures, because that's who I'm, encountering. And so, you know, like any person, you have conflict with your parents. And so I found that when I come across a position or a topic where my parents and I disagree, and it's rooted in that culture clash, I switch over into nonviolent communication. And I think, especially my dad's the psychiatrist, and having that ability to communicate with my parents, especially my dad, in that way has changed our relationship truly. And so I often talk to my clients about that and I say, look, there are different tools we can create. I can help you learn, and we can practice it. We practice it in our prep meetings, our debrief meetings, and it helps them practice it during interactions with their co-parent or their separated spouse, and it really truly helps alleviate the difficulties that the issues they may have created in communicating prior to working with me or any other lawyer. And so I think that is one of the biggest things I've learned through this process, that it's so important. It's so important the way we communicate and meeting people where they are. And so whether someone gets it right away, awesome. If you need practice, I'm going to be that person to help you practice in a safe, contained environment so that when you're talking to your co-parent, it's not, how dare you be 30 minutes late to, the pickup drop off exchange point. It's, I see that, you needed more time. Were you feeling rushed? Do you need more time to get to this meeting point, or would you like to request that we find a more convenient meeting place? And so that those two different ways of communicating that, I think it takes down the emotion. And again, on the emotional spectrum, it moves us from the red closer to the black.
Absolutely, yeah. Growing up here, were you curious in marrying outside of what your culture wanted you to bring?
So I know where you're going, and so I will just say, on top of being the professional outlier in my family, I'm also, I guess, in my interpersonal relationships, also the outlier because I am unmarried and I don't have children. My older sister is married. My older brother is married, has two beautiful, beautiful children who I love more than life itself. And so I'm, again, the outlier because I've chosen not to be married. I've chosen not to have children, which I know will be an interesting question. Why did I choose family law with this perspective? But I think there has been a lot of pressure to meet cultural expectations. But as I've become older, the communication between my family and I has improved. And quite honestly, I mean, I've shared this before with many people. It's not a little known fact. I had a cancer diagnosis in 2022. And the way that I had to approach that with my family, because I am very close to my family, I moved to Greensboro almost 18 years ago. And then in 2019, my parents made the transition here. 2020, in the middle of COVID, my sister and her husband made this transition. So we all live within a 15 to 20 minute, distance of each other. And so when I had to share that medical diagnosis with my family, my parents especially were so supportive. And I think at that point is where we had the shift in our relationship, also the way we communicate, in that it's not the end all be all to find a partner, to get married, and as I call it, being a good Indian wife, meaning you take care of the house, the home, your spouse, your partner, the kids, the family, all of that. And it's not that I don't want to do that. It's just that's not what I've chosen. And so I've had partners who are, of a different cultural, religious, ethnic background. I choose not to share that much with my family until it's gotten to a point where it is, serious. And, you know, they, I think at this point, are wanting me to be happy. And at the end of the day, I think that's what any parent wants for their child. And so I would say if you asked me that question maybe 5, 10 years ago, I'd have a different answer. But I think right now, I think with, you know, the, I call it the cancer, with the cancer, perspectives have changed. And I think both my parents, my family are much more open minded of not following cultural expectations, familial expectations, and things like that.
Did your siblings follow that culture expectations?
I think they did very, I mean, in their own way, based on who they are, but they both married within 6 months of each other, which was really a busy time for my family. My brother's wedding was the big fat Indian wedding in India. And so that was a different experience. My sister had her big fat Indian wedding in here locally in North Carolina. And I I know my parents would love to have more than a fur grandbaby for me, but, they want to see me happy, and I think they see how happy my siblings are, and at that point, them, in their own ways, meeting those cultural expectations, um, worked for them because they're happy. They have a fulfilled life. My brother and his family, they're coming down here to visit. They live in Michigan. They're the only ones further away, but they're coming down to visit in a few weeks. And it's one of those things that, truly I could not have imagined a life like this, what as a 14-year-old, I just knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to, you know, be married. I wanted to have, 3 kids just like my mom did, but I knew I wanted to work all the time, like not all the time. Didn't want to stop working. I wanted to continue working. And so, your mind, your perspectives change, and I think my parents saw that at the root of it, it's happiness, right? Where are you going to be at peace? Where are you going to find your person? And they did in the ways they did, and they're happy. My brother met his wife. He's the surgeon, and she's a CRNA, and they met in the hospital while working. So, they didn't have an arranged marriage, what people commonly think of. South Asian cultures having arranged marriages. They met, they fell in love, got married, had 2 beautiful kids, gave me a niece and nephew that I love. And so, I think the end goal is always to be content, to be happy and at peace. Um, and so it's it's been a journey, but I think we've found that within our family, and that the melding, quite honestly, of our cultures.
Oh, that's beautiful. I ended up marrying a white man, and that did not go over well, but
Oh.
but that's okay. It's
Well,
quite
and
interesting.
also it was very interesting. One of the first partners I had introduced to my family was Indian, but from a different part of India than where my family is from. And so that was also a very big culture clash because our family spoke different languages. I mean, if you count the number of states in India, there's probably twice as many different languages that are spoken. And obviously, the most common people here are Hindi, and so that was a shock. This is someone Indian. I should check all your boxes, but wait a minute, we speak different languages, different cultural, familial traditions, being from a different area, and so I had that experience, and I don't know how my family will react if I brought home someone who is not Indian. But at this point, again, I'm at just like you, I have to make those adult decisions for my life, and what's going to bring me peace and happiness, and keep my emotions in the black. And I feel strong and confident, at this point, that I will make those decisions when I have to.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely follow your heart. Follow love. I feel like growing up too,
Mhm.
a lot of my female friends were so caught up in looks, and I would always see
Yes.
them. That's very I understand it, but that shouldn't deter you from being, with that person if
Mhm.
have that safety and love in that
Yeah.
relationship. It's very interesting how there's so much that goes into it, but also
Right.
ultimately it's really just about you and, looking deep down of what will make you happy, like you were saying.
Absolutely.
With the whole cancer, how did that affect your newly business? I mean, you started your business in 2018, you said, I think,
Yep.
and then
Mhm.
2022.
Mhm.
So could you kind of take us into
Yeah, yeah. So I got my diagnosis. I guess it's the preliminary diagnosis, and anyone who's gone through some traumatic health situations will know those dates. And it was August 23rd, 2022. My doctor called me. I was sitting at my desk, and I like everything like just bottom out because I just did not know what to do. No, I say no one. No one in my immediate family had gone through a cancer diagnosis or a major health crisis such as this, and I I was numb, right? And then I talked to, the doctor who my initial doctor who I did like the scans, the ultrasounds, biopsies, all of that. And, she said, let's get you to a specialist first. And I want you to see more than one. And so I went to the first specialist. Um, and luckily, it was around Labor Day weekend. So my family was all in town. That was actually, I think, our very first like full family trip with my both my siblings and their families, my niece and nephew, and we went to the beach. And after that trip at the beach, I came home early so I could go to the specialist. And that doctor told me, yes, this needs to be treated soon. Don't wait a year, but it's the time to talk to your family. I had already been going through the test for about 3 months at that point. Yeah, about 3 months, yeah. Beginning of the summer through the end of the summer, and, um, after talking to my parents, again, my family, my siblings, they're all in the medical field, so they all had a lot to share, a lot of advice to give, and things to consider, but at that moment, I considered taking short-term disability for the surgery, for recovery. I wouldn't know if I needed additional treatment after surgery, and so, um, you know, it was scary because at that point I did have an associate attorney working for me who was supposed to take over the litigation practice as I was already starting that transition to minimize all of my litigation court cases and focus on collaborative family law, finish my mediator certification, and it was a lot. Fourth quarter of 2022, I don't know how I got through that, just because I didn't know how I felt about it, how I was processing it, and I have clients and I'm doing all these things for my clients. How can I balance this? And I'm very private. And so talking about all of this is difficult for me, but it's needed. And again, I take care of my mental health. I've been working with a therapist to help with like the medical trauma of managing it, that as my emotions, my mental health, so I can be at my best place to continue with the business. And so that first medical leave I took was extremely scary. I had a judge, 2 days before my medical leave, before my surgeries, ask me to come back on December 1st. For a conference with the other attorney and a different judge, and I said, Your Honor, here's a letter from my oncologist saying I'm actually going to be in surgery at that exact moment at 9 o'clock. So no, I will not be in court and I cannot come back. And so it was frustrating where I had to get to that point of being like, here's a letter from my oncologist, my surgeon. And so after that, we there was they found it had spread, and so I had to have a course of radiation. And so with the second medical leave, I felt more open in sharing what I was going through because how else am I going to have support if I don't share it? And so that was a really really scary moment because I always had the mindset of, as a lawyer, you have to be, strong. You have to give a powerful persona. You have to be an authority. And to me, this was a weakness. That how can I be open about this, have clients trust me with their legal situations, their emotional situations, and I'm not open, right? And so when I had that second medical leave, I talked to my colleagues before. I talked to them about what it looks like, what I'm going to have to do, what that recovery looks like. And I was shocked. And again, the goosebumps are coming up because I had so many colleagues text me, email me saying, if you need me to cover anything, even after you're back, just send me a message. You know, I had a colleague say, I don't do family law, but if, my law partner does. So if I need to ask them to cover something for you, you just let us know. All it takes is a text message. And and that was one of the most surprising, unfortunately surprising things that I experienced, because it wasn't a matter of being seen as weak or not an authority in my field. It was seen as she's human. She's going through human situations, events, occurrences, and asking for help. If I can't ask help for myself, how can I tell my clients to ask for help? And so a lot of that was difficult with the business, and a new business, right? Because we're still in the recovery from COVID, still around, middle of 2022, we still have glass partitions in our courtrooms. We still, I don't think we had the mask requirement in the courthouse at that point, but still, the remnants of the COVID pandemic and regulations and things like that. So I had to be extra careful, and it was difficult, but finding that support with my colleagues was tremendous, and I think that is truly what helped me get through that difficult time frame.
Wow, that's powerful. During that, you were able to keep your business open.
Right. And so with that, it started with, my associate at the time um ended up leaving. She realized family law was not the what she wanted to do, and I respect that. When you're it's not your passion, or you see it affecting your life in other ways, I want you to be happy, right? I want you to find your passion. I want you to do what fuels you professionally. And so I was a true solo for probably 2 months during that period. And I decided to hire a full time paralegal, someone who was experienced, who was skilled, who had I say experience, but I mean like life experience. I think that can translate much more powerfully than even like on the job type experience. And so I found my current paralegal. She's still with me. She runs my life. I feel like she makes the world go round for me and our clients and the firm. And she hit the ground running, and she was there. We did limited hours, because obviously I can't meet with people. I'm not going to court. I can't have settlement conferences, but she was able to, get documents started, get the drafts done, get appointments lined up, get just answer the phones, quite honestly, when people are calling to make appointments. And it was part of, attorney Patel is on medical leave until April 1st, and we're not scheduling appointments that first week she's back, so she can catch up on any communications or court dates or whatever it may be. But let's get you on the calendar, and let's get whatever assistance, or let's get a plan in place. And so we did operate on a limited schedule during that time, but I was able to stay open. I was able to kind of fill the pipeline, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
For someone listening who feels like their marriage is unraveling right now, what is one step they can take today to move toward a healthier resolution?
I think Can I give 2 steps?
Absolutely.
Okay. First step, find a mental health professional, and that can be a counselor, a therapist, whatever that may be, licensed clinical social worker, whoever that is. Find someone to talk about that. And that's how you're taking that first step to manage the emotional, the trauma, whatever those experiences were. And then the second step is to educate yourself on your options. There's, the way I see it, the way I practice law is there's no one option, one route that's perfect for everyone, right? Everyone has unique experiences, unique family structures, unique scenarios they've gone through. And I will advise them on different ways, but I think people, if they're considering that they're at that point, they need to just know what their options are. And oftentimes I find that either finding a resource, like hopefully my book is going to be for many people, or two, just meet with an attorney. Get that basic information about what's going to happen, or what are the things I need to do to prepare, or what do I need to think about in terms of my financial issues, whether it's alimony, like spousal support, whether it's property division. The kids want to stay with me, I need to stay in the house. How can I make that happen? And with that, I think once they educate themselves with one, their options, but also, meeting a lawyer and kind of identifying the things they need to be thinking about, I think through those steps, a mental health professional and meeting with a lawyer, I think those are probably the two most invaluable things that someone can do if they're considering a legal separation, a divorce, um, and just getting that information, because as cliche as it sounds, knowledge truly is power. And I will share in my book, as my favorite chapter, it's called it's not called it's like a choose your own adventure type of chapter, where I go through the different options for dispute resolution for family law matters. And I talk about going to court. I talk about negotiating with another attorney, or your other counterpart, your spouse or your co-parent. I talk about mediation. What does that look like? And I talk about the focus is the collaborative law. And each of these options, how does this kind of play out such that you can kind of have some foresight? And so I think that's one of, I mean, honestly, it's probably my favorite part of the entire book, because I think it does the best job of helping people get those pieces of information that really to them are all encompassing. I mean, your finances and your children. What I honestly, what's more um of a higher priority than those two things?
Yeah. So, from everything you've seen in your career, what does being in the black mean when it comes to family, separation, and starting over?
Yeah, so I think being in the black truly is finding that moment of peace. And it's not going to be peaceful 24/7. I mean, that's just not reality. But it's being able to, let's say with your co-parent, being able to communicate about your children, being able to not send a child support check in your kid's backpack during an exchange or on a weekend, whatever that may be. I find that being in the black is not always going to be your constant, but it's what you're working towards every day. And it might be staying in the black, going from the heightened emotions, the stress level up to here. We've worked through the process, we've gone through collaborative family law, we have legal settlement documents, we have a parenting plan, a parenting agreement, and the stress has come down. But this is one stage, one phase of life. We're transitioning, and how do we maintain that in the black as we go? And I feel like it's going to go up and down. It ebbs and flows, right? That's life. But I think part of that is once you go through this process, you have the tools, you have, experience using nonviolent communication, you have the experience of shifting the way of communicating about your position versus your interests, your co-parents' interests. When new partners come into play, that's when maybe you're on the emotional spectrum, you're going to get closer back to the red because there's this new person involved in your children's lives. But then, we find a way to get you in the black and maintain that, whether it's through co-parenting classes. I mean, where in my county, that's a first step. If you have a lawsuit filed, you have to go to parenting class and custody mediation. And so those are, some of those things that we'll revisit, and we'll talk about that, and we'll say, how can we get you into a place where we can maintain this peace, and knowing that it's going to ebb and flow. You're not always going to be on a constant peaceful state. I mean, I wish, I hope and wish and pray for my clients that that happens. But, you know, what I've seen, the reality, you have to work. It's not going to be something that just happens. We have to find our resources and help maintain that as we go through this process, given the different things that come up in life, with whatever may happen. I mean, like for me, it was a major medical trauma, that I still have an active cancer diagnosis. My doctors told me, I go to Duke University Cancer Center, and they told me October 2028, we're going to get you that cancer free diagnosis and we're going to pop bottles. And so it's like for me, yeah, every 6 months I have the higher stress, and maybe I'm going back into the red, but I'm going to find a way to keep moving towards, you know, finding that peace in my day-to-day life. And so I even talk to my clients about that. It's not always going to be, as I say, cupcakes and rainbows, but we want the cupcakes and rainbows most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just definitely, like you said, working at being the best version of yourself, whether it's,
Hmm.
helping people in your career field or being a better human in the world. Well, I mean, if we want to just generalize it all. So, where can our listeners find you?
Yeah. So my law firm website is law office of lompp.com. There's a lot of just basic general information about the different types of areas I practice. But I would say follow my social media pages. I'm very involved in local, state, and national bar associations. I do have, outside of being a family law attorney, I'm very passionate about women in the law, protection of women under the law, and helping propel women in the legal fields. And so I do a lot of work with, I'm a past president of the Greensboro Bar Association, our third largest bar association, local bar association in North Carolina. I'm a two-time past president of the North Carolina Association of Women Attorneys, past chair of the Women in the Profession Committee for our North Carolina Bar Association. And so I share a lot of different things, the activities that I do to so people can learn about me. This past week, I was in Raleigh, North Carolina all week for State Bar Council. I'm an elected counselor for our state regulatory agency. The council is 66 members throughout the state, lawyers, retired judges. We have public members, non lawyer members, and we handle discipline, lawyer discipline. We handle ethics inquiries, basic operations of the state agency. And so I share, all the things that are happening on the state level in our capital of how it's going to affect the profession, and really, communicating with my judicial district, my constituents, if you will. And so I think the social media is probably the greatest place you'll get to know who I am. Our Instagram account is LOMPP1118. In honor of when we opened, November 2018. And then Facebook is, again, facebook.com / I believe. I always get the slashes mixed up. I think it's / LOMPP. And so those are the best places. Also, I'm on LinkedIn, and I share a lot of my activities. I reshare different, helpful tips. I'm also so it might sound random, but I'm certified in mental health first aid, and I think that's a great tool that I've worked on to help the practice, help my practice, and help people. And so I share a lot of information on those three avenues that I think people can just learn about me, what I do, the different activities, and I think it just you have to be relatable. You have to be human. I mean, in between all the meetings last week, I took 3 hours and I went to the Carolina Hurricanes hockey game last Thursday evening in between all the meetings. It was a late night, but I made it Friday morning to the Friday meetings. But it's just one of those things. You have to have balance. I'm a human just like everyone else. So those are the best places to find more information.
Absolutely. I could be wrong, but I always figure lawyers and doctors don't really have a life outside of their
Exactly.
their work
Exactly.
isn't quite there. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about that I didn't get to ask?
I mean, we really hit everything I wanted to share. I love your podcast. I've already sent it to handful of people, and I know I'm gonna share it with my clients because I think it's really important, and especially as a family law attorney, you really have to think more than just the law. You have to think about the emotions and the feelings that go into all of these different ways to resolve disputes at the end of the day, right? That's why lawyers are in the picture, because there's a dispute, there's a disagreement. And I want people to know that there are options. You're not alone, but there's so many different ways that we can find a satisfactory, a peaceful outcome that works best for you and your family. There is a way.
And I definitely true heartedly believe that you will be a very good answer, a very good resource,
Thank you.
very helpful for other people if I can get my words together.
Yeah.
Well, it was so nice to have you on
Yeah.
here.
Thank you. And then, last little plug for my book. It'll be out in late winter, early spring, so February, March of this year. And Your Marriage Peacefully, and it'll be, online. It'll be in some local bookstores, and your typical Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, all those places online. So just keep an eye out for that. I hope it can help people, and that's really all I want to see is to for it to help people find peace, find that elusive peace that they will find.
That's all we can do is try to
Yeah.
help. Thank you for being here. If something you heard today moved you, share it with someone you love. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can follow me on Instagram at In the Black Passion Project for more behind the scenes and guest spotlights. And remember, no matter where you've been, you're not behind. You're becoming. Stay in the black.